All right, so strategy checklist for word problems. In this video, what I want to do is I want to go over the strategy checklist, which I introduced in a video, which is Introduction to Solving Word Problems. I'll put up a link up above there in case you want to see it or watch it before. It might be useful. So in that video, I introduced a strategy or kind of a checklist, steps 1, 2, things to think about as you are solving a word problem. So I'm going to take that checklist and I'm going to apply it to an actual word problem. Now, when you're solving your word problems, obviously you don't always have to do a checklist. Some things will pop out at you. If you do enough problems, eventually you might realize that there's patterns to some problems. So your mind will automatically try to shift in that gear. But having a checklist style kind of on the side and things to think about, if you're stuck, is kind of useful. And I'm going to use the checklist and kind of go back and forth and then solve a problem exactly according to this checklist. And hopefully it'll give you a sense of how you can either create your own checklist of things to think about, or you can borrow this one and apply it to word problems you might be solving in the future. So that checklist included kind of 7 steps that typically arise especially as you start solving some kind of science problems. And those science problems can be related to pretty much anything. So from physics, which is very commonly done, okay, because it's all kind of based on word problems and applications, to healthcare, to business, and other applications. So those 7 steps are, so let me recall. Step 1 is you should always ask yourself, what am I solving for? That's the first thing. So when you dive into a word problem in sciences or in math, sometimes you get overwhelmed because there's just so many things happening at you. That's why having a checklist of saying forget all of those things. Just first ask yourself, what are you trying to solve for, right? And that's the quantity that you're looking for. Then number 2, always think about, what units will you be needing in order to solve that quantity? Because most problems that you deal with, if you're going to be solving for some quantity which is being measured in some way, then you're going to need to have some measuring units. Number 3, that's when I start to pick off. Okay, so I try to pick off all the given information. So all the different numbers, all the units, measurements that they give me, right? So I don't really try to solve, I just go in this strategy. Number 4, then I start thinking about, are units being consistent? And if you forgot about consistency, again, I'll put up a link up above there for you so that you can kind of see it for yourself and review it. Only then do I start trying to formulate either maybe there's a given formula or maybe I'm going to create my own equations or expressions to be solving this problem. Then I just use order of operations, so that's step 6. And then I just check that my final answer, am I being asked to round? Because I don't want to have too many decimal places, or sometimes, whatever, your teachers or the problems you're working on actually do ask you to round. It's not always the case, but it may be the case quite often. All right, so here is the example that we want to go over. So let's kind of walk through it, and then I'm going to take those 7 items and solve it, kind of go checklist style. So at breakfast, Amalia decides to have a cup of oats with 8 halves of walnuts. She adds half a banana sliced to the oatmeal and 3/4 of a scoop of whey protein. She mixes the delicious mix with half a cup of 2% milk and water. Now, even just by reading that, your brain might start kind of trying to process and think what should I remember or what should I try to write down? At this stage, I don't write down anything. I just try to let my brain be and think about. So obviously it's some breakfast, we're eating something. Now, in the second part, it says a half of cup of oats contains approximately 150 calories. A full walnut contains about 26 calories. A full regular sized banana, about 105 calories. 1 scoop of protein, okay, so typically contains 121 calories. 2% cup of milk, 122 calories. Water contains no calories. So water is, I guess, a good one if you're trying to avoid the calories. In any case, so that's a lot of information that we have there, right? Now, at the end, it says, how much energy did Amalia obtain from her morning breakfast? Round your answer to the 1 if necessary. And that last final thing is what step 1 is all about. So in step number 1, it says, what am I solving for? Meaning, what are they actually asking you to solve for? So that's a lot of junk that they provided, but they're just asking you for one thing. And I'm finding that, and it's always typically at the end, okay? But you're gonna have to dissect it and trying to see, like, what are they asking me? What's the question? The question is, how much energy did Amalia obtain from her morning breakfast? So right there, I will notice that they are asking me just this one line is basically what checklist 1 is. And out of that, I want to know, okay, so what quantity? And, in the introduction to those word problems, the link that I pointed out to you, I utilize this table. So, initially when you're starting, you might want to have a table, especially in sciences, maybe over the quantities that you want to work on. But if you do enough questions, you won't really need the table and you're going to be able to pick off the items. So the quantity in here, so at least in this case, that we saw was basically energy. So here is energy. The symbol for energy is capital E. And then I have some units. And just by reading, okay, kind of checklist 2, I'm going to come back. So the first item that, or at least what I'm going to do on the first go is I'm going to kind of highlight for myself, all right, they want me to solve for energy. So that's checklist 1. So within here, okay, that's my step 1. You found what you're going to be trying to solve for. Checklist 2 is, okay, so what are the units that I'm going to use? Now for energy, if I go back here to the table, there are obviously many units you can use for energy. But depending on the application, some units are more commonly used than others. Now in here, we're talking about breakfast and we're trying to calculate the energy from that. And most people, because we eat and then we check labels quite a bit and it's also in the media and so on, we're kind of aware that the main unit for energy is calories. All right? So here for myself, I will note that, hey, wait a minute, I want energy. And as I read the question, okay, I'm going to try to use the unit of calories. So that would be my step number 2. Now, my step number 3 is, okay, so write down givens. So everything that's given. And now what I'm going to do, and I do like to write actually given for myself, and then I'm going to start to try to see, okay, what did they give me? Now you start to break down each sentence and try to pick off what they give us. So this energy, so I'm going to kind of highlight it as I'm going along. I'm going to go back and I'm going to check. All right, so Amalia decides to have a cup of oats. Okay, so cup of oats. So that's important. So that's what she eats. With 8 halves of walnuts. Okay, so 8 halves of walnuts. So now pause, go back to your given, okay, and start writing these things down. So we have cup, okay, of oats. So that's 1. We have another one, which is 8 halves. Okay, so 8 halves of walnuts. And now I can go back and continue, just so that I remember. She adds half a banana. So half a banana. So right there. That's what she has in there. Now it's sliced. Okay, so that doesn't matter. It doesn't really change that for us. To the oatmeal and 3/4 of a scoop. So 3/4 of a scoop of protein. Okay, so I'm going to add that in to our items that they give us. So half a banana. Let's maybe write this. Half of a banana. 3/4 of a scoop of protein. So 3/4. Okay, so of protein. Scoop. Now she mixes the delicious mix with, I don't know if it's delicious. I mean, I would really like this breakfast. I'm not sure if you would. With half a cup of 2% milk. So half a cup of 2% milk. So that is so right here. And then water. Okay. So half cup of milk. Now it's 2% milk. And then, water. Now, water is kind of irrelevant in terms of energy because they did tell us, okay, that water contains no calories. But I wrote it down anyways. All right, so those are all the items, okay, that I have. Now, for those items, okay, so the next thing is I'm going to continue. Now, they give us the calorie count for certain amounts. So it says a half of cup of oats contains approximately 150 calories. That's what they give us. So let me do a different color here. So we have a half of cup. So this is approximately 150 calories. All right. So that's what we have first. Now, what that means, so I'm going to go back in here. Now, I have a cup of oats, and I know that half a cup of oats is 150 calories. All right. So I'm going to put a comma here, and here it says half a cup, okay, is equal to 150 calories. So that's that. Now, a full walnut contains approximately 26 calories, okay? So that's my second thing. So that is for the full walnut, and it contains 26 calories. So I'm going to write that in as well. So that's one walnut is 26 calories. Okay, so I'm going to do that. Let me shift this so that I just have enough space there. A full regular sized banana is 105 calories. Okay, so that's a banana. It's right there. So comma. So one banana is equal to 105 calories. All right. Now, one scoop of protein. So this protein, so that's next. So a scoop of protein is 121 calories. One scoop is 121 calories. 2% milk for a cup contains 122. That's right there. So 1 cup contains 122 calories. And then water, this is 0 calories. Those are all my givens. So that was that third checklist style. So what did they give us? That's what they gave us. Now, I want to check for consistency of units. Well, everything they gave us was actually in calories already. So notice everything is in calories right here. So when we're calculating energy, it's already consistent. All right, so that is something that you check. So make sure that, it's not in like kilocalories or something different, or kilojoules or joules. Okay, you just want to make sure that they are the same. So that's what you would have there. So that's step number 4. Now we create an equation or some kind of a formula. Now for energy, all right, so typically what I might say, so I'll say let E, okay, be the energy from the breakfast. All right, that is just to let whoever is reading this so that they know exactly what you're trying to solve for. So you just kind of have like a let statement. Sometimes people call that, but it doesn't matter. You don't have to use let. You can just say E, okay, just to remind anybody who's reading, what it is that you're trying to solve for. Now I'm going to try to create this. Now I know that my energy, so what is this energy equal to? And please don't use calories equals to. You're solving for the quantity. You're not solving for a unit. So we always will write, energy is equal to. And now what we're going to do is we're going to just take these one by one. So a cup of oats. So they had a cup of oats. All right. Now here it says a half of cup. okay, is equal to 150 calories. Well, we had a full cup, right? So what we have in here, so we have to be careful. So we have 2 times 150 calories because we had 2 halves, which is equal 1 cup. Okay, so that is my cup of oats. Now, 8 halves of walnuts. So again, so notice here it says 1 walnut is 26, right? So 8 halves. So if you have 8 halves of walnuts, so that means, okay, 2 halves make up a full walnut. So just be careful with that. So what we do is now we're going to say plus. Now I'm going to say that means we have 4 total walnuts in, because 8 halves is equal to 4 total. And that is times 26 calories. Next, we have half a banana, but 1 banana is 105. So this is going to be plus 1 half times 105. So that's that. I'm going to start running out of space here. I'm going to make this a little bit tighter. Okay, like this. The next item that we have is the protein. So I have 3/4 of a protein. Well, 1 scoop is 121 calories. So I'm going to say plus 3/4 times 121. And then finally, we have half a cup of the milk. Well, 1 cup was 122. And this is just adding all of the items. So, all I've done is I've just added up all of the items, okay, that Amalia has consumed. There we go. That's what they are. Now, the next item is, okay, so notice here, okay, we created our equation or a little formula for the energy we'll take in. Now we're going to solve it. So use the order of operations to try to solve this entire thing. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do next. So my energy is equal to, so now 2 times 150, so that's 300 calories, plus 4 times 26, so that's going to be 104 calories, plus a half of 105, so that's going to be 52.5. You can check that if you like. That's that. Plus 3/4 of 121. So for this one, that's okay. So 3/4. Let's put that in. 3/4. Okay. So times 121, which gives me 90.75. Now 3/4 you can also input into the calculator as 0.75, so that's up to you. And then finally we have a half of 122, which is going to be 61. That one's a little bit easier to calculate. Now once we have this, well then we can just go ahead and add it all up. So I will take all of this and just add it. So 300 plus 104 plus 52.5 plus 90.75 plus 61. So that is 608.25. Now, let's not forget, so in terms of the units, so we should have, or at least we should put in the unit right here, because they are all in calories, they're all consistent. So that was great. And now finally, so the only last item, and this is why the checklist is kind of good, because you don't forget. It says, oh yeah, that's right, did you have to round? Well, in this question, it did actually say round. Round your answer to the 1. So if we're going to be rounding, well, to the 1, it's right here. So that means, well, there's a 2 right here, so 2 will not increase this. So my energy, okay, is about 608 calories. And now, you're done. Sometimes some of your teachers will ask for a closing statement, so you can put, either a therefore statement or make it more formal. Or, some teachers might say, just highlight this in so that you can have it, okay, and someone can see exactly what your answer was. That's the strategy, and that's kind of how you can go by and take that strategy and solve word problems, and it probably will be a little bit more helpful to you. Doesn't apply to all word problems, sometimes depending on where you are, what you're doing, but the key core things to think about are those 7 items, Okay, kind of step through this entire thing. So I hope that this was useful, and it just allows you like a checklist. You can have it always on the side, you can ingrain it in your mind, and then just see like, okay, what do I have to do when I'm solving these problems? Okay, thanks for watching. See you in a future video. Bye, everybody.